My name is Ashley Reed. I'm 40 years old, but if you asked my dad, he'd probably still tell you I'm a kid playing dress-up. Sometimes I think the echo of his laughter will haunt me forever, bouncing off the walls of St. Mark's Hospital in Seattle. The same laugh that once made me feel 10 feet tall, now making me feel like I'd shrunk to half my size. It was supposed to be a normal Thursday, or at least as normal as things get when your mom survived 2 heart attacks and you've lost count of the number of hospital bracelets she's collected. I'd come straight from a double shift, didn't even bother to change out of my battered jeans, grey Seattle police sweatshirt, and sneakers that probably should have been replaced 3 years ago. My badge was in my purse, my service pistol locked in my car, my hair pulled back in a quick, nervous ponytail. Dad was in his element, which is to say, he was running the show. William Reed, a big bill to everyone in the King County car business, stood at the head of my mom's hospital bed, arms folded, feet planted, and jaw set like he was negotiating a contract instead of listening to Dr. Morgan, the attending. 3 dealerships, 200 employees, and a reputation for never, ever taking no for an answer. I'd watched him broker deals for everything from luxury SUVs to discount sedans. Now, I watched him try to negotiate with fate, and it wasn't going any better. Dr. Morgan explained that Mom was stable, but her heart was more delicate than ever. I wanted to ask questions about new treatment options, but before I could get a word in, they took center stage as if the doctor was just another customer. "That's my Ashley," he said, not looking at me but gesturing in my vague direction. "My unemployed daughter lives in a world of make-believe. Claims she's a cop, but honestly, who can tell these days?" I could see the nurses trying to hide their discomfort, offering me those polite, apologetic smiles you give someone at a bad party. Dr. Morgan didn't laugh, just nodded, but I caught the look he gave me, a blend of curiosity and mild pity. The thing is, I could have corrected Dad right there. I could have said, "Actually, I'm Detective Reed, lead investigator on the Green Lake abductions, and last week the mayor called me by name at a city council meeting." But I didn't. Sometimes fighting old battles is more exhausting than chasing new criminals. This wasn't new. It had always been like this in my family, even before Mom got sick. Dad would make Chris, my older brother, out to be the next big-shot lawyer in Seattle. My sister Lindsay, the hotshot surgeon, always got her name in bold. And me? I was the punchline, the copy with the crazy stories, the one who couldn't make Thanksgiving because she was playing policey again. I remember at Christmas, Lindsay would lean across the dinner table, "So, Ash, how's work?" And I'd start to say something about a tactical op or undercover detail, but Dad would talk over me about how he got a great deal on a fleet of trucks or how his new TV ad was running during the Seahawks game. I joined the police after high school. It was never meant to be a rebellion, but Dad saw it that way, a running away from real responsibility. When I made sergeant at 22, he told people I was just figuring things out. When I made detective, he'd say, well, maybe now she's finally growing up." Maybe. After a while, it became a joke he told himself so often that it became true in his head. I'd come home from 16-hour shifts, bruised and tired, and Dad would ask if I had caught any jaywalkers lately. If relatives asked what I did, he'd change the subject or make a joke about me chasing donuts. It was easier for him, I think, than admitting he didn't really understand the life I'd chosen. But that day in the hospital, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Mom was quiet, pale, but her eyes followed me as Dad talked, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of something, pride, maybe, or just relief that at least one of her kids had shown up for visiting hours in the middle of a busy week. 3 weeks we lived at St. Mark's. I slept in waiting rooms, ate stale muffins from the vending machine, and tried to be helpful without getting in the way. Dad took the day shifts, running everything like a boardroom: doctors, nurses, insurance agents, even the cleaning staff. Chris, the lawyer, came in the evenings with his stack of legal pads, reviewing every new medication or bill with forensic detail. Lindsay showed up late, still in scrubs, explaining everything in medical jargon none of us really understood. And me? I was the free one. The one Dad would offer up to take the overnight shifts, since, after all, Ashley doesn't have a real job. I tried to explain: night duty at the precinct, court appearances, command briefings, but he waved it off. Something with the reserves, maybe. Or is it neighborhood watch? In reality, my something was a full caseload of major crimes, rotating night and day shifts, constant emergency call-outs, and a team of officers who looked to me when things got ugly. But in Dad's mind, if I wasn't selling cars or saving lives in an OR, it didn't matter. What hurt wasn't that he didn't get it, it was that he didn't even try. And still, that stubborn, 8-year-old part of me wanted him to see me the way he used to, back when he called me a Sheriff Asher and let me sit on his lap at the dealership, pretending to be the boss, barking orders and making imaginary sales. Back then, he'd say, this kid's going to run the world." Now, I'd settle for him just believing I ran my own life. In the hospital, every day blurred into the next. Outside, spring rain drummed against the tall windows, but inside, time seemed suspended. My father held meetings with the doctors the way he'd manage a sales conference: loud, confident, and always sure he knew best. Sometimes he'd argue about a test or prescription, his voice booming down the hall. He was the same William Reed he'd always been, a force of nature, but the kind that sweeps through without warning, leaving you to clean up the mess. My brother Chris would show up in a suit, juggling calls from clients and court, never letting you forget he was the busy one. He'd sit at the end of Mom's bed with a yellow legal pad, reviewing every detail of her care and insurance coverage, as if life was just another contract to negotiate. My sister Lindsay, the youngest but by far the most respected, would breeze in from Harborview Medical Center, her blue scrubs a badge of honor. She'd review the charts with Dr. Morgan, sometimes gently correcting him, and the staff would listen because a doctor read a commanded attention. And me? Dad kept offering my free time to the staff, as if my presence was guaranteed, like some bonus you throw in to close a deal. "Ashley's always available," he'd say with a smile, never noticing the way the nurses glanced at me, unsure if it was a joke or a dig. "She doesn't have a real schedule." It hurt, more than I wanted to admit, but it wasn't new. I'd been dealing with Dad's dismissiveness for as long as I could remember. Even when I tried to explain why I couldn't be there every night, court subpoenas, briefing the mayor, emergency call-outs, he'd shrug it off. "That police stuff, it's not like the real world. You can miss a shift." How could I explain that lives depended on me? That there were days when my phone buzzed so much I barely remembered to eat, and nights when I came home so wired from adrenaline I couldn't sleep for hours? To my family, I was the one who never settled down, and never bought a house in the suburbs or started a family. I was their wild card, the one they worried about at Christmas and quietly pitied on birthdays. But the truth was, my work was as real as it gets. I was a detective sergeant with Seattle PD, leading a major crimes unit, armed robberies, kidnappings, high-profile investigations that kept me on call at all hours. My squad looked to me for answers in the field. City council members called me for insight on public safety. And still, to my father, I was Justy his daughter, the one with the interesting stories. Sometimes I'd sit with Mom late at night while she dozed. Her breathing was shallow, but her hand squeezed mine, and I'd whisper stories about work, not the gory ones, but the ones that made me proud. The nights we got a missing kid home safely. The Thanksgiving when my team brought dinner to a shelter instead of going home. The day a victim's family sent me a thank you card, scrawled in crayon by their daughter. I didn't know if she heard, but it comforted me to talk. To feel like, for just a moment, I was more than the unemployed daughter. Sometimes I caught Dad listening from the doorway, his face unreadable, and I wondered if he understood even a little. But most of the time, he was too busy, too distracted by the next phone call, the next crisis. When the nurses scheduled shifts for family to stay with Mom overnight, he'd say, Ashley's got nothing going on, put her down for the weekends. I'd try to protest, but it was pointless. Arguing with William Reed was like shouting into the wind. After the third week, exhaustion set in. I'd been living on bad coffee and vending machine snacks, catching naps in the staff lounge between my real job and the hospital. Once, I came straight from a crime scene, hands still shaking, hair smelling faintly of gunpowder. Lindsay saw the stains on my jeans and raised an eyebrow. Rough day at work? I nodded. She patted my shoulder, awkwardly. You know, you could have been a doctor, Ash. Dad would have loved that. I forced a smile. We can't all save lives the same way. It was always like this, everyone measuring worth by their own yardstick, never quite able to see each other clearly. In the hospital, I was the extra Reed, the one who didn't quite fit in with the overachievers. It was lonely, but familiar. But I kept showing up, anyway. Because that's what cops do, you show up, no matter how thankless the job or how invisible you feel at home. And in those quiet hours, holding Mom's hand as the rain battered the windows, I made peace with being the unemployed daughter. Because I knew the truth, and deep down, maybe one day they'd see it too. It started small, just a handful of offhand comments, the kind of little jabs families sometimes use to keep the peace by keeping each other in neat, familiar boxes. But with my dad, the jabs had become a habit. I can't even remember when he stopped asking about my job, but it must have been years ago. He'd brag to his friends and employees about Chris's first big trial win or Lindsay's promotion to chief resident, but when it came to me, the story got blurry. Ashley's still with the police, something with patrols, I guess. One Thanksgiving, when an uncle asked what I actually did cut in before I could answer, she likes to play with the police dogs. You know, keep things lively. I tried to laugh, but I watched the recognition fade from my uncle's eyes, and I swallowed back the urge to speak up. Why bother? It was easier to let people believe what they wanted. The truth was more complicated than anyone realized. After I joined Seattle PD, I worked patrol, walking beats on Capitol Hill and South Lake Union, learning every street and alley, every shortcut. I became a field training officer, teaching rookies how to stay alive and keep their heads. I'd seen things, good and bad, that would change the way anyone looked at the world. When I made detective, I spent 2 years in Vice, then rotated to major crimes, robberies, kidnappings, murders. Every day, I woke up with a sense of purpose and a list of people relying on me to do my job well. I tried, at first, to share little pieces of my life. At family barbecues, I'd talk about the new case management system we implemented, or the time I talked a teenager out of jumping from the Aurora Bridge. Lindsay's eyes would glaze over, Chris would sneak looks at his phone, and Dad would ask if I'd thought about him moving up. Maybe management at one of the dealerships, something stable. After a while, I gave up. I stopped bringing work stories to the table. I let Dad's version of me float around the family like a rumor that never quite dies. The unemployed daughter, either a drifter, either one who never quite figured things out. If I'm honest, part of me stopped trying not because I didn't care, but because I was tired. Tired of defending my life to people who'd already made up their minds. But every so often, I'd catch a glimmer of the old dad, the one who called me a sheriff and told everyone I was his tough little girl. Sometimes, on days when the hospital was quiet, he'd sit beside Mom's bed and reach for my hand, the way he used to when I was a kid scared of thunderstorms. His hand felt different now, older, more fragile, the grip a little uncertain. He never said much in those moments, but the silence felt almost like an apology. I'd squeeze his hand back, not saying anything, and hope he could feel how hard I was trying, even if he couldn't see it. One rainy Thursday, everything came to a head. I was sitting beside Mom, half watching the monitors, half planning for an early morning shift at the precinct. Chris was reviewing legal documents by the window, and Lindsay was talking in low tones with Dr. Morgan outside. Dad was on his phone, loudly discussing dealership inventory with someone named Joe from Tacoma. I felt the familiar buzz of my work phone, a secure message from my captain, flagged urgent. Read, meeting with Mayor, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Homicide Task Force update. Need you there. I read it twice, mind racing with everything that needed to happen before dawn. Case files to review, patrol rosters to approve, witness interviews to confirm. I barely had time to think before Dad noticed the glow of my phone and turned, voice rising so all of oncology could hear. For God's sake, Ashley, put that thing away. Your mother is in the hospital and you're playing Candy Crush? Heads turned, nurses, orderlies, even the elderly man 2 beds down. I opened my mouth to explain, but Chris, barely looking up, added, "A year, Ash, maybe leave work outside for once." Lindsay shrugged. It's not like you have court in the morning. It was as if my world and theirs existed on 2 different planets. My jaw tightened. I looked at Dad and saw only disappointment, and for a second, it nearly broke me. I wanted to yell, to rattle off my resume, to make them understand the weight of the badge I carried. But instead, I stood, quietly leaned down, kissed my mother's forehead, and slipped out into the corridor. The air outside felt colder, sharper, like a slap. I called my captain, confirmed the meeting, and spent the next 4 hours at a diner nursing black coffee, my notebook open, wondering if the real Ashley Reed would ever exist in her own family's eyes. Maybe, I told myself, you don't need their approval anymore. Maybe, after everything, it's enough to know you're making a difference, even if no one else sees it. The drive home from the hospital that night felt longer than usual, the wipers pushing aside streaks of rain as I made my way through the city's empty streets. Seattle never really sleeps, but after midnight, the roads become a different world, red lights reflecting off wet pavement, only the occasional cab or delivery truck passing by. It was the kind of night that made me feel invisible, just another face behind a windshield. I found myself replaying Dad's outburst again and again, the way his voice filled the hospital corridor, the embarrassment heating my cheeks all over again. It wasn't even the first time he'd said something like that in front of strangers, but for some reason, this time stung more. Maybe because I'd finally started to believe my own life mattered, that the work I did was worth something, even if he didn't see it. When I got home to my little apartment in Belltown, I dumped my keys on the table, fed my old mutt Oscar, and collapsed onto the couch. The rain outside kept up its steady drumming, a lullaby for the restless. Sometimes, on nights like this, I'd scroll through old photos, academy graduation, my first precinct team, candid shots from crime scenes, faces blurred, but memories sharp as glass. I thought about calling someone, maybe Mara, my partner on the force, or even my captain, who'd always treated me like I belonged. But pride is a stubborn thing. Instead, I let myself sit in silence, watching Oscar snore on his bed, his paws twitching in some dog dream where he was probably chasing squirrels through the city park. I checked my work phone again, making sure tomorrow's briefing materials were in order. A spreadsheet of open cases, updates on the recent homicide downtown, the security plans for the mayor's meeting. Police work is detail, detail, detail. No one outside really understands the pressure, the sense that any slip could have real, lasting consequences. Sleep came late and was fitful. I dreamed about being lost in the hospital, endless corridors, always searching for a room I could never find. When I finally woke, dawn was barely breaking and my inbox was already buzzing. Mara had sent a message. Heard about your mom. Anything you need, I've got you. Also, your running point at the mayor's briefing, FYI. Sometimes, the force felt more like family than my own relatives ever did. I got to the precinct before 7. The squad room smelled of burnt coffee and damp raincoats. The team was already assembling, young officers checking gear, detectives reviewing notes. My captain gave me a nod as I walked in. You look like hell, Reed, he said, but with a half smile. Get some sleep last night? Some, I lied. The briefing was tense. The mayor had questions about a string of robberies in Capitol Hill. Too many, too bold, too close together for comfort. I walked her through the cases, the patterns, the suspects. She listened, her gaze sharp and impatient, but when it was over, she thanked me by name. Good work, Detective Reed. I want regular updates. When I left the meeting room, I felt that old familiar surge of pride, brief, but enough to remind me why I did what I did. I thought about calling Dad, maybe even texting him. Just briefed the mayor. She's trusting me with citywide strategy. But I knew better. If I sent a message, I'd get a one-word reply, or worse, another joke about donuts or a playing cop. So I let the urge pass. That afternoon, while working on a report, my phone rang. It was Lindsay. Ash, can you cover Mom's overnight again? Dad's got a dealership thing, and Chris says he's in court. Sure, I said, even though I hadn't had a night off in weeks. Thanks, as she replied, sounding relieved. You're always so flexible. I almost laughed at the word, flexible. Like I was a rubber band, meant to stretch but never break. I closed my laptop, packed up my bag, and drove back to St. Mark's, my badge tucked away, my uniform swapped for sweats and a hoodie. That night, as Mom slept, I watched the city lights flicker outside her window and wondered what it would take for my family to really see me, not as the backup, the extra, the free one, but as someone who mattered in her own right. I thought about the day when, just maybe, my father would see the real badge, not the pretend one he imagined. And I promised myself, no matter how invisible I felt, I wouldn't quit showing up. Because, in the end, maybe showing up was the only thing that ever really mattered. St. Mark's Hospital at night was a strange world, dimmed lights, quiet hallways echoing with the distant sounds of machines and the shuffle of nurses on rounds. Most families had gone home. I sat beside my mom, the only light in the room coming from her monitor's soft blue glow. Her breathing was steady but shallow, and every now and then, she'd open her eyes and smile weakly. Sometimes I imagined telling her everything, what it was really like in my world. The panic of a midnight call, the weight of a city's fears settling on my shoulders. The feeling, after a successful rescue or a solved case, that maybe, just maybe, all those sleepless nights were worth it. But I knew Mom was tired. I didn't want to weigh her down with things she couldn't fix. A nurse popped her head in, saw me, and smiled. "You're Ashley, right? Your dad says you're always here. He brags that you're his night watch." I smiled back, a little bitter. "Yeah, something like that." The nurse hesitated, then added, "We think what you do is amazing. Not everyone can show up, you know?" For a moment, I wanted to hug her. It's strange how a stranger's approval could feel warmer than your own father's. Later, when the hospital quieted even more, I tried to do some paperwork, just enough to keep up with the flood of case notes and police emails that never stopped. But my mind kept drifting back to my family, to the different versions of Ashley they saw. For Dad, I was the unreliable one, the dreamer. For Chris, I was the free sibling, someone who could drop everything at a moment's notice. Lindsay saw me as a cautionary tale, a don't get too comfortable, or you'll end up like Ash, always moving, never settling. Yet outside this building, I was Detective Reed. I had a badge, a team, and the trust of people who relied on me to find answers when it mattered most. At around 2 a.m., my phone vibrated, a priority message from the precinct. A witness in the Jefferson Park abduction case had turned up at a nearby ER, scared and ready to talk. I called Mara, my partner, to handle it. Still, guilt gnawed at me for not being there in person. That was always the pull, family on one side, duty on the other. Some nights I thought I'd be torn in two. By dawn, Mom was awake enough to talk for a while. We talked about nothing and everything, the neighbors, her favorite nurse, the weather. I almost told her how lonely I'd been, how hard it was to be the outsider at home. But I didn't. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You're doing good, Ash," as she whispered, voice raspy. "Don't let your father's stubbornness get to you. He's just scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "That you've gone farther than he ever dreamed. That you don't need him." Her words stuck with me the rest of the day. Maybe Dad's jokes were just his way of handling fear, fear of change, fear of his little girl growing up, fear of being left behind. But I also knew I couldn't spend my life waiting for him to catch up. I had to keep moving forward, badge and all. By the time Lindsay showed up to relieve me, I was exhausted. She handed me a coffee and, for once, didn't rush out the door. Instead, she sat down across from me. "I heard you're leading the homicide task force now," she said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, since January." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "That's big." Dad might not say it, but he knows. He talks about you sometimes. Says you're fearless. I smiled, surprised. He never says that to me. He probably never will. But I think he's proud, in his own weird way. We sat together in silence, two sisters trying to bridge a lifetime of misunderstanding. When I left the hospital, the rain had stopped and the city felt a little less heavy. In the parking lot, I took a deep breath and looked up at the grey Seattle sky. I promised myself I wouldn't hide my story anymore, Not for Dad, not for anyone. If they didn't see the real Ashley Reed, that was their loss. Because I was finally starting to see her myself. That Thursday evening was when everything finally boiled over. Mom's condition had taken a sudden dip, and the whole family gathered in her hospital room, Dad pacing near the window, Chris glued to his legal pad, Lindsay checking Mom's for and muttering about the attending's last prescription. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding Mom's hand, quietly willing her to stay with us a little longer. I'd muted my work phone, but the screen still flashed. Another secure message, this time blinking priority. Detective Reed, you're needed at HQ 6 a.m. Press briefing on the Jefferson Park case. My mind raced. The mayor's office wanted updates, the press was circling, and there were new leads on a case that had kept the whole city up at night. But I was also here, supposed to be the free Reed, always available for family. I barely had time to figure out my next move before Dad's voice cut through the hush. For heaven's sake, Ashley, he snapped, loud enough for every family in the hall to hear. Can't you put the phone away for one night? Your mother's here, and you're playing with your gadgets? Chris looked up with that loyally frown of his. Yeah, Ash, you can let the detective thing go for one night, right? Lindsay chimed in, adjusting Mom's blanket. She's right, Dad. Ashley's always been a little detached from reality. The words landed like a punch. Detached from reality? Did they really think my work was some kind of game? 15 years of night shifts, running operations, risking my life, and this is what my own family thought of me? I looked around the room, searching for even a hint of understanding. Dad was glaring, Chris was already back to his notes, and Lindsay was fussing over for bags. I felt invisible, like I was 12 again, not a detective trusted with the city's safety. Only Mom met my eyes, her gaze unfocused but somehow steady, as if she could see something no one else could. I stood up, careful not to let my voice shake. I have to go, I said, quietly. Dad scoffed. Of course you do. You always run when things get hard. I wanted to scream, to list every name and every case and every life I'd touched. Instead, I bent and kissed Mom's forehead, hoping she'd remember this moment, even if no one else did. At the door, I paused. Dad, I said, finally facing him, tomorrow morning I'll be briefing the mayor's office on the Jefferson Park investigation. After that, I have a press conference. And next week, I'm flying to DC to help coordinate a national task force. That's not a hobby. That's my job. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that hurt more than any words. Right, Ashley. You're briefing the mayor, and I'm having lunch with the president. Chris smirked. Lindsay shook her head. Even the nurse looked uncomfortable, as if she was watching a family drama play out in slow motion. I nodded once and walked out, every step feeling heavier than the last. In the elevator, I could finally breathe. I texted Mara. Need coverage tonight. Emergency. I'll be in early for the briefing. She replied instantly, You got it, Ash. Family first, but don't let them drag you down. The drive back downtown was silent, just the hum of rain and the click of the turn signal. As the city lights blurred past, I replayed every word, every look, every wound reopened by people who were supposed to know me best. By the time I reached my apartment, I was numb. I didn't cry, didn't rant. I just took off my badge, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for a long while. It was funny. Out there, that little piece of metal meant trust, responsibility, even a kind of family. But here, at home, it was just a thing. Something no one else really saw. That night, I slept barely at all. The rain came down harder, as if the whole city was mourning with me. In my dreams, I was running through streets I knew by heart, searching for something just out of reach. Sometimes it was my badge, sometimes Mum's hand, sometimes just a voice calling my name. Morning came too soon. My phone buzzed with work messages, but nothing from my family. As I dressed in my uniform, every movement was automatic, muscle memory honed by years of practice. I pinned on my badge last, looking in the mirror. For once, I didn't feel invisible. I felt strong. I was ready to face the world, even if my family never really saw the real me. The morning of the mayor's briefing, I woke before my alarm, the city still wrapped in fog and silence. I put on my dress blues, the ones reserved for public events, crisp, tailored, the Seattle PD badge gleaming on my chest. For a long moment, I just stared at my reflection. Detective Ashley Reed, strong jaw, tired eyes, hair neatly tucked under my cap. Out there, I was a leader. In here, I was still just trying to prove I mattered. The precinct was already buzzing when I arrived. Reporters clustered outside, their vans and microphones making the entrance look like a film set. My captain met me at the door, giving my shoulder a squeeze. "You ready, Reed?" "Always," I answered, and for once, I meant it. Inside, the squad room was a hive of activity. I ran through the briefing with my team, updating them on the latest developments in the Jefferson Park case, a kidnapping that had shaken the city to its core. Mara handed me the new forensics report, and I skimmed it quickly, mentally updating my remarks for the mayor. The press briefing itself was a blur. Flashbulbs, questions, the mayor's sharp gaze beside me at the podium. I walked the public through the investigation, highlighting the teamwork, the progress, the hope that we'd have a breakthrough soon. When it was over, the mayor leaned in and whispered, "You made the department look good today, Reed." "Thank you." For the first time in days, I let myself feel a flicker of pride. I texted Lindsay a quick message. "Briefed the mayor today. National Task Force wants to talk next week. Hope Mom's doing okay." She replied, "Eventually, a mom's stable. Good job, Ash." No mention of Dad. Back at my desk, I caught up on casework and watched my squad work through leads. The younger officers looked at me differently after the briefing. More respect, maybe, or just curiosity at how their boss handled the spotlight. Mara tossed a donut at me, grinning. For the record, I'm the only one allowed to make donut jokes. We both laughed, a genuine, easy sound that cut through the heaviness of the week. My phone buzzed with a message from Chris. "Heard about the press conference. Hope you're not too busy for Mom." I rolled my eyes, but didn't answer. Some patterns never change. By late afternoon, the city felt lighter. The Jefferson Park case got a major break, a witness came forward, and my team moved fast, tracking down a suspect within hours. I coordinated the operation, my voice calm and steady on the radio. When it was over, and the missing girl was safe, my whole squad let out a cheer. That feeling, knowing I'd helped save someone, that my work actually mattered, was better than any apology I'd ever get from Dad. After the paperwork was done, Mara and I grabbed burgers at a little diner near the station. She listened while I vented about my family, nodding in all the right places. You know, Ishi said between bites, as sometimes the people closest to you are the last to see who you really are. I sighed. Yeah. You ever wish they'd get it? Sometimes, Amara admitted. But then I remember, I get it. Your squad gets it. Maybe that's enough. On my way home, the city was lit up, neon and rain-washed. I stopped on a bridge over Lake Union and watched the water shimmer. I thought about Mom, about Lindsay's small olive branch, about the girl we'd saved that afternoon. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt okay with who I was. I was Detective Reed, daughter, sister, leader. Whether or not my family ever truly saw me, I was finally starting to see myself.